A waitress warned the millionaire about his wife is cheating on him.
The evening lights of the city glittered as James Cole sat alone at a corner table in a luxurious restaurant. The place was an elegant establishment, frequented by the wealthy and influential, yet James had long grown accustomed to its grandeur. He was a man of means, a self-made millionaire with a sprawling empire and all the luxuries that wealth could buy. But there was something money couldn't purchase: connection, warmth, and the happiness he had once imagined marriage would bring. Instead, his life was filled with an aching loneliness he could never quite shake, not even in this lavish restaurant filled with laughter and conversation. His wife, Sophia, was nowhere to be found that evening, nor was she ever by his side in moments like these. Sophia was beautiful, with an elegance that turned heads everywhere she went, and for a time, James had believed they could build a life together, a partnership that would offer him solace and companionship. But he had been wrong. Though they lived under the same roof, shared the same luxurious space, they were worlds apart. Sophia's beauty, sharp wit, and poise had captivated him initially, but her heart seemed as cold as the diamonds she wore. She was distant, aloof, and their relationship had slowly become more about appearances than connection. They attended events together, posed for photographs, and dined at expensive restaurants. But Sophia's heart, he knew, was never truly his. Tonight James was alone once more, staring out of the window at the city lights, his mind wandering to the emptiness of his life despite all his success. He sighed and took a sip of his wine, feeling the weight of his solitary existence settle around him like a heavy fog. As James sat in silence, his presence didn't go unnoticed. Across the room, Emily Hughes observed him discreetly from behind the bar as she polished a glass. Emily was young, with soft features and a gentle smile that seemed to put everyone at ease. She'd worked as a waitress in this restaurant for years, and her attentive nature made her a favorite among regular customers. She had an eye for detail, noticing things others missed: a crumpled napkin left on a plate, the smallest frown on a diner's face, a hint of sadness in their eyes. And tonight it was James who caught her attention. Over the past several months, she'd often seen him dining alone. He was always impeccably dressed, carrying himself with a quiet, dignified air. Yet there was a sadness about him, a loneliness that seemed to linger even in a crowded room. Emily didn't know his story, but she could sense he was someone who needed comfort, someone who perhaps felt adrift despite his polished exterior. James was a man of habit, she noticed. He ordered the same dishes, a simple steak and red wine, and his expression rarely changed. She sensed that he was a man who had once hoped for more, perhaps even dreamed of a life full of warmth and laughter, only to find himself mired in coldness and solitude. It was a feeling she knew well. Though Emily came from a modest background and had few material luxuries, she had always believed that the most valuable things in life couldn't be bought. She cherished kindness, honesty, and sincerity, qualities she found lacking in the wealthy patrons who frequented the restaurant. Yet something about James intrigued her. He didn't seem to fit the mold of the typical affluent client. There was a vulnerability in his eyes, a look that reminded her of someone seeking something far beyond wealth. One evening, as she approached his table to take his order, she noticed the weary look in his eyes was more pronounced than usual. Gently she asked, "Is everything all right, sir? You seem a bit down tonight." James looked up, slightly startled, as if no one had noticed his mood before. For a moment, he hesitated, but something in Emily's kind expression encouraged him to speak. "Just a long day," he replied with a weak smile, attempting to brush off her concern. But he could see that she wasn't convinced. "Well, if there's anything I can get to make the evening a little better, just let me know," she said softly. Her words held a genuine warmth, a kindness he hadn't encountered in a long time. It was a simple gesture, but it touched him in a way he hadn't expected. He nodded, the weight of her kindness settling over him. "Thank you, Emily, is it?" She smiled, surprised that he remembered her name. "Yes, sir." "Please," he replied, his voice softening, "call me James." From that night on, their brief exchanges became a small comfort to him. Emily would check in on him, sometimes offering a soft smile or a gentle word, and over time, James began to look forward to those moments of human connection. She didn't pry, didn't ask intrusive questions, but her presence felt like a quiet assurance, reminding him that he wasn't invisible, that someone saw him. As the weeks went by, Emily couldn't help but wonder about the sadness that clung to him. She often saw him seated alone, and even though he always seemed polite and composed, there was an air of melancholy that followed that. Her colleagues often remarked on how quiet he was, how he always came in alone, with no one by his side. One evening, as she cleared his table, James lingered for a moment, glancing up at her. "Do you ever feel like something's missing?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily paused, surprised by the question, but nodded slowly. "I think everyone does at some point. Sometimes it's the simplest things we miss the most." Her words struck a chord within him, echoing in his mind long after he'd left the restaurant that night. She spoke with such simplicity, yet he sensed a wisdom in her words, a depth that belied her young age. Over time, Emily grew accustomed to his quiet presence, and in those small exchanges, she saw a man who longed for meaning beyond wealth and status. She couldn't fully understand his life, nor the burden of isolation that wealth sometimes imposed, but she understood loneliness, understood the quiet ache of wanting something genuine, something real. And as she watched him leave the restaurant night after night, Emily found herself hoping, almost instinctively, that he would one day find what he was searching for, that whatever was missing in his life, whatever void lingered, he might somehow, someday, fill it with something more than solitude. One rainy afternoon, as Emily rushed through her shift at the restaurant, she noticed a familiar face among the crowd, a woman sitting near the window, her profile turned slightly toward the street. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she recognized Sophia, James's wife. She had only seen Sophia once before, in a photograph James had left on the table during one of his visits. There was no mistaking her, with her immaculate, expensive style and an aura of elegance that seemed to draw people's eyes wherever she went. But tonight something was different. Sitting across from Sophia was a man Emily had never seen before. He was tall, with a confident, easygoing air about him, and he leaned towards Sophia, his hand casually brushing hers as they laughed together. The intimacy between them was unmistakable. The man reached across the table, tucking a strand of her hair behind her ear, and Sophia's laughter grew softer, more intimate. They exchanged smiles, and it was clear that this wasn't a business meeting or a friendly dinner, it was something far more personal. Emily felt a pang of unease, a heaviness settling over her as she watched. Her mind whirled, knowing this man was not James. She quickly turned her gaze away, focusing on clearing tables and filling water glasses. Yet her thoughts kept drifting back to what she'd seen. Sophia and the stranger shared the kind of warmth and connection that she'd never seen between James and Sophia. She found herself questioning if she had misread the situation, if somehow she was mistaken. But every time she glanced over, their shared glances, the way they leaned toward each other, only confirmed what she dreaded to acknowledge. As her shift continued, Emily couldn't shake the discomfort she felt. The rest of the evening passed in a blur, her thoughts tangled in a mix of worry and sympathy for James. She knew it wasn't her place to interfere in his personal life. After all, they were just acquaintances, two people who exchanged brief words in a restaurant. She had no right to disrupt his life with something that might not even be her business. But the next evening, when James returned to the restaurant, she felt her resolve begin to waver. He looked more tired than usual, his expression distant, his usual quiet sadness even more pronounced. She served him his usual order, and as she poured his wine, she caught a glimpse of the sadness in his eyes. It was a sadness she recognized all too well, one that seemed to be seeking answers, or maybe just someone who understood. Throughout the evening, Emily found herself watching him from afar, struggling with the choice of whether to say something. She imagined what it would feel like to be in his position, living with someone who, unbeknownst to him, was unfaithful. She thought about how she would want to be told, about how hard it would be to find out from a stranger. Yet she also knew that James had a right to know the truth. This was not a matter of idle gossip, it was about honesty and respect. Finally, as the restaurant began to empty and James remained at his table, quietly lost in thought, Emily gathered her courage. She took a deep breath and approached his table, her heart pounding. "James," she began softly, her voice trembling slightly, "can I speak with you about something? It's personal, and I wouldn't bring it up unless I thought it was important." James looked up at her, surprised. He could see the sincerity and concern in her eyes, and after a moment, he nodded. "Of course, Emily. What's on your mind?" Emily hesitated, choosing her words carefully. I don't know how to say this, and I don't want to overstep. But I feel like you deserve to know." She paused, looking down as she collected her thoughts. "Yesterday I saw your wife, Sophia, here at the restaurant. She was with another man. I don't know their relationship, but they seemed very close. Intimately close." James's face froze, his gaze sharpening. "Are you sure it was her?" His voice was steady, but Emily could hear the strain, the tremor of disbelief underlying his words. "Yes, I'm certain," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't know what to think at first, but the way they acted, I thought you should know." James sat back in his chair, his face a mixture of shock and pain. For a moment, he seemed to drift into his own thoughts, as if trying to process what he had just heard. His initial reaction was one of disbelief. This was Sophia, the woman he'd devoted years of his life to, the woman he had tried in his own way to make happy. He felt anger rise within him, mingling with the ache of betrayal, but more than anything, he felt the weight of Emily's words pressing down on him, forcing him to confront a reality he had never wanted to believe. He looked back at Emily, his expression softened by the vulnerability that he rarely showed. "Thank you for telling me," he said, his voice hoarse. "I know this couldn't have been easy for you." Emily reached out, placing a comforting hand on the edge of the table. "James, I know we don't know each other well, but I just felt like you deserved the truth. Whatever you decide to do, I'm here to help however I can." James nodded, grateful for her support, though his mind was still swirling with questions. "It's hard to believe," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "Sophia and we've drifted apart, but I thought we still had some respect, some understanding between us." Emily's eyes were filled with compassion as she listened. "Sometimes people lose sight of what matters," she said gently. "And sometimes they forget the value of what they have until it's gone." James looked away, his gaze fixed on the empty wine glass before him. Her words resonated with him in a way he hadn't expected. He realized how much he had wanted to believe in his marriage, to believe that despite their distance, there was still something worth holding on to. But now, that illusion felt fragile, as if it might shatter with the slightest touch. For a moment there was silence between them, a shared understanding hanging in the air. Finally James took a deep breath, his expression one of steely resolve. "I need to find out the truth," he said quietly. "I need to know if what we had was ever real." Emily nodded, her heart aching for him but also filled with admiration for his strength. "I understand. And if you need anything, I'm here." James offered her a faint, grateful smile, and in that moment, he realized how much Emily's honesty and kindness had meant to him. She had given him the courage to face a painful truth, and in doing so, she had become more than just a waitress, she had become someone he could trust. After his conversation with Emily, James left the restaurant feeling like the ground had shifted beneath him. His heart was heavy, a mix of disbelief and dread settling in. Could Sophia truly be unfaithful? Could everything they'd shared, however strained it had become, really have been so hollow? The questions weighed on him as he navigated the empty streets, his mind racing with the possibility that his marriage had been nothing more than a facade. That night, sleep evaded him. He replayed Emily's words in his mind, each time feeling a fresh pang of anger and hurt. He knew he couldn't simply ignore this. He needed the truth, painful as it might be, and he couldn't let his emotions cloud his judgment. Early the next morning, James made the decision to hire a private investigator. He wanted facts, irrefutable evidence that would either confirm or dispel Emily's claim. He told himself that he deserved to know that after all he'd invested in his relationship with Sophia, he owed himself the truth. A few days later, James received the investigator's first report. It was thorough, detailing Sophia's daily routines, her social engagements, and her interactions. For a while, everything seemed normal. She spent her days attending charity events, brunches, and meetings with friends. But then, there were the instances that didn't add up. The occasional business lunch that stretched for hours, or the sudden afternoon errands that coincided with sightings of her with another man. As the investigation continued, the pattern became disturbingly clear. Sophia was indeed seeing someone else, and not just occasionally. She had a regular companion, a man she met at upscale venues around town. The photographs in the report showed them holding hands, laughing, even sharing intimate moments. The evidence was undeniable. Seeing those images, James felt a chill wash over him, followed by a rush of anger, disappointment, and finally, a deep, aching sadness. The truth was inescapable: Sophia had betrayed him. Over the next week, James found himself haunted by memories of their early years together. He remembered the quiet evenings they'd shared in the beginning, the long conversations about their future, the nights he'd stayed up late working, just so he could build a life they could both be proud of. He had once believed that they would create something meaningful together, a home filled with love, a family, a partnership that could withstand anything. But now, those memories felt like illusions. The life he'd built, the sacrifices he'd made, all seemed to fade into insignificance as he faced the betrayal that had taken root in his marriage. He couldn't help but question if Sophia had ever loved him, or if she had simply loved the wealth, the lifestyle, and the security he provided. When he felt ready, James decided to confront Sophia. He needed to hear her admit the truth, to look into her eyes and understand why she had chosen to betray him. He chose a quiet evening at home. After she returned from one of her outings, her eyes alight with an excitement he'd once thought reserved for him. "Sophia," he began, his voice calm but firm, "we need to talk." She glanced at him, momentarily caught off guard. "What's wrong, James? You look tense." He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "I know about you and the other man. I know everything. I've seen the photos." For a moment, shock flashed across her face, and she quickly averted her eyes. But as the silence stretched between them, she straightened, her expression shifting from shock to defiance. "James, I didn't want you to find out like this." His heart sank. There it was, the confirmation he dreaded, spoken aloud in her own voice. "Why, Sophia? Why would you do this?" Sophia hesitated, but then something hardened in her gaze. "You wouldn't understand, James. You're so focused on your work, on making money, on keeping up your image. Do you know how many nights I've spent alone, feeling like nothing more than an accessory to your life?" James felt a flash of anger mixed with sadness. "So this is my fault. You chose to betray me, and now you're saying it's because I wasn't there enough for you." She laughed bitterly. "You think throwing money around and buying me gifts makes up for the fact that you're never actually present. You live in your own world, James. A world where you think wealth can fix everything." Her words cut deep, and for a moment, James felt his anger dissolve, replaced by a hollow feeling of resignation. He realized then that they had been speaking different languages, living in different worlds. What he had thought was a commitment, she had seen as a cage. What he had thought was love, she had seen as mere provision. He met her gaze, feeling a strange calm settle over him. "If you were unhappy, why didn't you tell me, Sophia? Why didn't you just leave?" Her eyes softened for a brief moment, a flicker of sadness crossing her face. "Because it's complicated. I did love you once, James, or at least I thought I did. But somewhere along the way, I realized that I didn't want this life, not the way you do. And I didn't know how to tell you that." James felt the weight of her words, but they only served to deepen his sadness. She had chosen deceit over honesty, chosen to betray him rather than face the uncomfortable truth. The woman he had once trusted had betrayed not only his heart but the very foundation of their relationship. "So that's it, then?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Our marriage was nothing more than convenience to you." Sophia looked down, a flicker of regret in her eyes. "I don't know, James. I thought I could live with it, but I couldn't." He took a deep breath, absorbing her words, feeling the finality of it all sink in. He had given her his trust, his loyalty, his love, and in return, she had left him hollow and questioning everything he had believed in. Without another word, James turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the room. He knew then that his marriage was over, and that the life he had spent years building had unraveled before his eyes. Yet, despite the heartbreak, he felt a strange sense of release, a liberation from a life that had held more pain than fulfillment. In the quiet of that evening, he knew he would have to start again, to rebuild his life from the broken pieces. But he also knew that he could do it with honesty and integrity, values that would never abandon him. And as he walked out of the room, a newfound resolve began to take shape within him, a determination to seek out the truth, no matter how painful it might be. A few days after confronting Sophia, James found himself walking back into the restaurant where Emily worked. He had thought long and hard about his next steps, trying to sort through the wreckage of his marriage and the raw emotions left in its wake. Though he was still struggling to make sense of it all, there was one person who had been honest with him through it: Emily. She had given him the courage to seek the truth, and he felt a profound sense of gratitude toward her. As he entered, he noticed her standing by the counter, her face lighting up in surprise as she saw him. She hadn't expected him to return, especially after their difficult conversation. Approaching her table, he offered a small, genuine smile. "Hi, Emily. I wanted to thank you," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "Thank you for telling me the truth, for caring enough to let me know." Emily nodded, her expression softening. "You don't have to thank me, James. I just felt you deserved honesty. I'm truly sorry that it turned out the way it did." He took a deep breath, pulling out the chair across from her and sitting down. "You know," he began, his gaze shifting to the table, "I thought I had it all figured out. I thought I knew what it meant to be successful, to have a life that mattered. But now, it all feels so empty." Emily looked at him thoughtfully, a sense of understanding in her eyes. Sometimes it takes losing something, or realizing it wasn't real, to see what really matters. It's painful, but it's also a chance to start again, to find meaning where it truly belongs. James looked up, meeting her gaze. Her words held a quiet wisdom that resonated with him. "You seem to know so much about life," he said, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "More than most people I know, to be honest." She chuckled softly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I don't know about that. I've had my own share of struggles. I guess I've learned to find comfort in the small things, to focus on what really matters." For the next hour they sat together, sharing pieces of their lives that they hadn't before. Emily told him about her background, about growing up in a modest family, and the difficult path that had led her to where she was. Her family had struggled financially, and she'd taken on multiple jobs to support herself and her younger brother. Life had been anything but easy, yet she had learned to navigate its hardships with a quiet strength and resilience. James listened, deeply moved. He hadn't expected to feel such kinship with her, nor had he expected her story to touch him in a way that felt both comforting and humbling. He admired her resilience, her ability to find meaning in simplicity, something he realized he had lost touch with amid his life of affluence and material success. Her sincerity, her lack of pretense, it was like a balm to the wound left by his wife's betrayal. As the days passed, James found himself returning to the restaurant more often, not out of loneliness, but because of the unexpected solace he found in Emily's presence. Each time they talked, he felt a little lighter, as if her kindness was helping him mend the pieces of his broken heart. Their conversations became the highlight of his days, each one a reminder that he wasn't as alone as he had once felt. Slowly they fell into an easy friendship marked by shared silences and simple, honest words. Emily had a way of listening that made James feel truly heard, and for the first time in years he felt free to be vulnerable, to let his guard down without fear of judgment. She asked him about his dreams, his passions, his regrets, and each question drew him out of the shell he had unknowingly built around himself. James had never thought he'd find comfort in such simplicity, but the honesty between them was refreshing. Emily didn't see him as a millionaire or as the CEO of a successful company. She saw him as a man, flawed and hurting, searching for meaning. And for James, that was a revelation. He realized that wealth, status, and success meant little if they couldn't connect him to others in an authentic way. One quiet evening, as they sat in the fading light of the restaurant, James turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "You know, I used to think that having more money, more success would bring happiness. But now, sitting here with you, I feel more content than I have in years." Emily smiled softly, her gaze warm. "Sometimes less really is more. Happiness doesn't come from what we own, James. It comes from finding people who make us feel seen, who bring us peace." He looked at her, the depth of her words sinking in. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that his pursuit of wealth had come at the expense of genuine connection. The sadness he'd carried for so long began to fade, replaced by something new: hope. Over the next several weeks, their friendship deepened. They spent hours together, talking about life's complexities, sharing dreams, and offering one another a sense of comfort that both of them had longed for. James found himself confiding in her, sharing parts of his life he hadn't spoken about in years. And Emily, with her gentle presence and open heart, listened without judgment, reminding him that he was worthy of kindness and trust. One evening, after an especially long conversation, James found himself reflecting on the connection they had built. He realized how much her presence had come to mean to him, how much she had helped him rediscover the parts of himself he'd forgotten. She had shown him that he was more than his achievements, more than his wealth. She had reminded him of his humanity, his capacity for love, and his ability to find joy in the simplest of things. As he walked home that night, James felt a quiet certainty settle over him. His life was beginning to take on a new shape, one that was simpler, but infinitely richer. And at the heart of it all was Emily, a woman who had helped him see beyond the facade of success, who had shown him the beauty of an honest, unguarded connection. For the first time in years, James felt like he was truly beginning to understand what mattered. And in Emily he had found a friend, a confidante, and perhaps, he dared to hope, the beginnings of a deeper love. As the weeks turned into months, James found himself drawn to Emily in ways he hadn't expected. Their friendship had deepened naturally, but now he felt something more, a quiet but undeniable warmth that spread through him whenever he was around her. Emily had become his confidante, a calming presence that brought light into his life, and he admired her deeply. She was compassionate, genuine, and resilient, qualities that he realized had been missing in his previous relationships, especially with Sophia. James began to wonder if he was falling in love with her. He thought about the differences between them, Emily's modest background, her quiet humility, her focus on things that truly mattered. She wasn't impressed by his wealth or status, she cared about the person he was inside. In her company, he felt free from the expectations and social pressures that had defined so much of his life. He began to dream of a life that wasn't dictated by wealth or appearances, but by love, honesty, and simplicity. But as their connection grew, it didn't go unnoticed by the people around him. Friends and colleagues began to remark on James's newfound happiness, wondering aloud who this mystery woman might be. When they learned about Emily's background as a waitress, however, some of them voiced their doubts. They questioned her intentions, suggesting she might be after his wealth rather than his heart. One evening at a business gathering, an old acquaintance approached him with a pointed look. "James," the man began, swirling his wine, "I hear you've been spending quite a bit of time with well, let's just say, a woman from a different world." James's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "Her name is Emily. And yes, I've been spending time with her." The man chuckled, his tone patronizing. "Be careful, James. Women like that often see men like you as a ticket out of their old life. Just be sure you know what you're getting into. Money can be tempting, even for the most innocent." Though he tried to ignore it, the words lingered in James's mind. He trusted Emily, but the world he had grown up in, the world of wealth, caution, and suspicion, had taught him that not everyone's intentions were pure. As much as he wanted to dismiss these warnings, a seed of doubt began to grow. A few days later, his mother, who was normally reserved, pulled him aside during a family dinner. "James, I've heard about Emily," she began, her tone laced with concern. "I only want what's best for you. You've been hurt before. Are you sure you can trust her?" James felt a pang of frustration but also worry. His mother's words mirrored his own fears, and he found himself questioning things he hadn't questioned before. He trusted Emily, but could he be so sure that her affection was genuine? After all, he had thought he could trust Sophia, and look where that had led. The doubt gnawed at him, creating an invisible barrier between them. The next time he saw Emily, his mind was clouded, and his responses were guarded. She sensed the change immediately, a look of concern crossing her face as they sat across from each other. "James, is everything all right?" she asked, her voice soft and steady. He looked down, unsure of how to explain. "Yes, I mean no. It's just complicated," he replied, the weight of the doubts burdening him. Emily reached out, her hand resting on his. "You know you can tell me anything. Whatever's troubling you, I'm here." But the words he wanted to say were trapped, tangled in the questions and worries that had taken root. He feared pushing her away with his doubts, yet he couldn't seem to voice them. Instead, he found himself pulling back, afraid to ask the questions that had surfaced. Over the next few days, a distance grew between them, a quiet tension neither of them spoke of but both felt acutely. James's mind was a battlefield of loyalty and doubt. He felt guilty for letting others' words shake his trust, but he couldn't ignore the nagging fear that maybe he was being naive. The world of wealth and power was riddled with people who had hidden motives. Was he foolish to believe that Emily was any different? Emily noticed the change but didn't press him, though the sadness in her eyes was unmistakable. She continued to treat him with the same kindness, the same patience, hoping that he would find his way back to the openness they once shared. Then, one evening, James found himself alone in his study, reflecting on the person Emily had shown herself to be. He thought of her kindness, her genuine laughter, her unwavering support through his most difficult moments. She had been nothing but honest and loyal, asking for nothing in return. The doubts that had been planted by others felt hollow in light of all that she had done. In that moment, James realized that if he wanted to truly experience love, he would have to let go of his fears and trust her fully. Love required risk, vulnerability, and the courage to believe in someone even when others doubted. The next day he sought her out, determined to put his fears to rest and apologize. When he found her, he took her hands in his, looking into her eyes with a sincerity that silenced all doubt. "Emily," he began, his voice filled with earnestness, "I'm sorry. I let other people's doubts get into my head. I let their fears cloud my heart. But I know you. I know your heart. And I'm done letting my own insecurities hurt us." Emily's eyes softened, a small smile breaking through the hurt she had carried. "Thank you, James. All I ever wanted was to be there for you. I would never ask for more than that." In that moment, James knew that he had finally found something real, something worth holding on to. He realized that love, when genuine, had no room for fear. And with Emily by his side, he felt ready to embrace the future with trust, compassion, and an open heart. Emily had sensed the shift in James's behavior over the past few weeks, a quiet unease shadowing his normally warm and open demeanor. Although he never said it aloud, she felt the tension in his words, the guarded looks that hinted at the doubts planted by others. It stung to feel his trust wavering, but rather than confront him, Emily chose to remain patient, hoping he would come to see her true intentions. She cared for him deeply, but she understood that love sometimes required patience in the face of uncertainty. She believed that, given time, James would realize she loved him for who he was, not for his wealth or status. Then, one morning, Emily received a call from James that startled her. His voice was strained, tinged with frustration as he explained that his company was facing an unexpected crisis. A significant business deal had fallen through, creating a ripple effect that threatened both his finances and his reputation. She could hear the stress in his voice, his usual calm unraveling under the weight of his responsibilities. "Emily," he said softly, almost as if he hated to admit it, "I don't know if I can fix this. I feel like everything I've built is collapsing around me." Without a second thought, Emily told him she would be there for him. She knew this was a moment that would test their bond, and she wanted to be the anchor he needed. Over the next few days, she dedicated herself to helping him, setting aside her own worries, and committing every ounce of her energy to supporting him. She spent late nights with him in his office, sorting through documents, researching solutions, and brainstorming ideas. She brought him coffee, sat by his side in silence when he needed to think, and offered a listening ear when he needed to talk. It didn't matter to her that his wealth and status were on the line. What mattered was his well-being, his peace of mind, and she was willing to give everything she could to see him through this storm. Even as colleagues and business associates began to distance themselves, doubting James's ability to recover, Emily stayed. She encouraged him, reminding him of his strengths and accomplishments, helping him rebuild his confidence. She kept her support quiet, not seeking recognition or gratitude, but giving her time and heart to someone she believed in. One evening, as they sat together in his office, James looked over at her, his gaze filled with something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time, gratitude mixed with awe. Emily looked tired, her eyes heavy from sleepless nights, but there was a warmth in her expression that never wavered. She had stood by him when it mattered most, asking for nothing in return. "Emily," he began, his voice choked with emotion, "you've done so much for me. You've been here through all of this, when most people would have left." She offered a gentle smile, reaching out to touch his hand. "James, I don't care about the money or the status. None of that matters to me. I'm here because I care about you. I want you to know that you don't have to face this alone." Her words washed over him, silencing the doubts he had allowed others to plant in his mind. He saw now that her love was untainted by greed or desire for anything material. She cared for him in the truest, most selfless way. Emily's presence had brought him a peace that he hadn't felt in years, a reminder that real love wasn't contingent upon success or wealth, but upon a willingness to weather the storms together. As the days passed, Emily's quiet, unwavering support helped him regain control over his situation. Together they tackled the challenges, turning what had seemed like an impending disaster into an opportunity for growth. James knew he couldn't have done it without her. She had proven, not just with words but with actions, that she loved him without condition. One evening, as they wrapped up yet another long day, James reached for her hand, looking into her eyes with a depth of feeling he could no longer hold back. "Emily," he said, his voice soft but resolute, "I let others' doubts cloud my vision of you. I let my own insecurities get in the way of trusting you fully. But now, after everything you've done, I finally understand. You love me for who I am, and you've shown me that real love is not about what we have, but about who we choose to stand by, no matter what." Emily's eyes softened, a tear slipping down her cheek as she nodded, her hand squeezing his. "I've loved you all along, James. Not for what you could give me, but for who you are, flaws and all." In that moment, James felt an overwhelming sense of clarity and peace. He realized he had found in Emily what he had always longed for, someone who saw him as a person, someone who chose him for his heart rather than his bank account. And with Emily, he felt he could finally build the life he had dreamed of, one founded on honesty, compassion, and true love. As they held each other close, James knew that his journey had brought him to exactly where he needed to be. He had learned that love, when genuine, was resilient and selfless. And in Emily's embrace, he found the home he had searched for all his life. With the weight of doubts and misunderstandings finally lifted, James felt as if he had been given a second chance at life, a life grounded in love, trust, and honesty. Emily's steadfastness had proven her love to him in a way that words never could. She had shown him that real love didn't require grandeur or wealth, but was rooted in genuine care, resilience, and devotion. In Emily, James had found not only a partner but someone who understood the heart of who he was, beyond titles and wealth. One crisp, clear evening, James took Emily back to the place where they had first shared their most honest words, the cozy restaurant where she worked. Now, it was empty, reserved for just the two of them. Soft candlelight flickered across their faces as they sat together, a quiet warmth surrounding them. After sharing a simple meal, James reached across the table, taking her hands in his gaze steady and full of emotion. "Emily," he began, his voice filled with gratitude, "you have changed my life in ways I never thought possible. You've shown me the kind of love that doesn't ask for anything, that's willing to give everything. I want nothing more than to spend the rest of my life with you." With that, he stood, pulling a small box from his pocket and opening it to reveal a simple yet elegant ring. "Will you marry me, Emily? Will you continue this journey with me, side by side?" Emily's eyes filled with tears as she looked up at him, a soft smile spreading across her face. "Yes, James," she whispered. "I've always dreamed of building a life with you, one filled with love, honesty, and happiness." As they embraced, their hearts were full, knowing that their love was no longer bound by society's expectations, wealth, or the past. Together they had built a foundation of trust and commitment that could weather anything life might bring. Their wedding was a small, intimate ceremony held in a sunlit garden, surrounded by close friends and family. There were no extravagant displays, no grand decorations, just a simple celebration of two souls choosing each other. And in the presence of those who mattered most, they exchanged vows that spoke not of material riches, but of the wealth found in loyalty, patience, and shared dreams. James and Emily began their life together not as a millionaire and a waitress, but as two people deeply in love, committed to a life defined by values they both cherished. They made a conscious choice to live modestly, finding joy in life's small moments, a quiet morning walk, an evening spent cooking together, or a peaceful night by the fire sharing stories and laughter. They chose a life that was rich in connection, compassion, and shared purpose. Their story became an inspiring example to those around them, a reminder that real love isn't determined by wealth or social status, but by sincerity and dedication. People who knew James saw the transformation in him, the man who once measured success by his net worth had discovered a deeper fulfillment through kindness, humility, and generosity. Together, James and Emily became known not for the opulence of their lives, but for the warmth of their hearts and the depth of their love. The lesson of James and Emily's journey was a powerful one. It reminded people that true happiness doesn't come from material gain or society's approval, but from the genuine connections we make and the love we share with others. Their story illustrated that a fulfilling life is built not on grand gestures or luxurious displays, but on small, consistent acts of kindness, understanding, and support. Real love, as they had shown, is about seeing each other at one's worst and loving anyway. It's about finding joy in each other's presence and creating a life that celebrates the beauty of simply being together. As the years passed, James and Emily grew together, their bond only strengthening with time. They faced challenges, but their love provided the strength they needed to overcome them. Their home, though modest, was filled with laughter, warmth, and the genuine comfort of a life well lived. And as they grew older, they looked back on their journey with gratitude, thankful for the obstacles that had ultimately led them to each other. On a quiet evening many years later, James and Emily sat hand in hand on their porch, watching the sun set over the horizon. The world around them was calm, and they were at peace, content with the life they had built. There were no regrets, only a deep appreciation for the love that had transformed their lives and the faith they had placed in each other. In that moment, they knew that they had found something far more valuable than any fortune, an enduring love that had withstood the tests of time, doubt, and circumstance. Together, they had built a life filled with purpose and meaning, proving that true wealth is measured not by what we have but by whom we hold dear. As they gazed into the fading light, James turned to Emily with a tender smile, grateful for the woman who had shown him the path to a life of fulfillment and happiness. And with hands intertwined, they faced the future with the same love and commitment that had brought them together, knowing that, in each other, they had found all they would ever need. And so, James and Emily's journey shows us the true meaning of love, one that is not based on wealth, status, or material things, but on sincerity, trust, and shared dreams. Their story reminds us that true happiness comes not from what we have, but from whom we choose to stand beside. We hope this story inspires you to cherish the relationships that bring meaning to your life. Thank you for watching, and may you find love and connection that go beyond the surface.